Welcome to this Podcast Plus, where we bring you insight for best practice in bite-sized chunks. Today, we provide evidence on why Lexcel is good for legal businesses. I'm delighted to be speaking today with the managing partner of a multidisciplinary Lexcel accredited law firm. My name is Neil Partridge and I'm the Operations Director at PDA Legal and a Lexcel assessor and consultant. I'm joined today by Mr. Richard Hull, who is the Managing Partner at Thomas Horton LLP.
Hello, Neil.
Hello, Richard, and thank you for joining us. We're going to be looking at the benefits of obtaining and retaining Lexcel accreditation, also how it juxtaposes with CQS and regulation, but also to look ahead and understand what's in it for firms as they continue to work with Lexcel in support of their businesses. I'm going to put a few questions to Richard and ask him to provide his feedback on these subjects. Without further ado, therefore, may I ask you, Richard, to set the scene by just telling us a little bit about your firm and the work that your firm does.
Yes, of course. So Thomas Horton have been in legal practice for about 150 years. So they've seen a lot of development over that period of time. We're what I call a regional firm. Based in North Worcestershire, working out of 3 offices. We're a multidisciplinary practice with 5 partners, and I'd say turnover of less than 5 million. Probably half of our work is private client probate conveyancing work. 25% of our work is commercial activity, so corporate, commercial property, employment law, matters like that. And then the final 25% is made up of legal aid. So we're still a legal aid practice, a thriving legal aid practice. Principally, those areas of legal aid that we undertake are care and family work, and also criminal legal aid. So what I would think is a genuinely multidisciplinary practice with 5 partners and about 65 staff.
And how long has the firm had Lexcel, Richard?
We've had Lexcel almost since its inception. And I've been involved in the Lexcel process since I became a partner, which was about 8 years ago.
So, Richard, clearly you're juggling a lot of different tasks, not only managing a law firm, but fee earning, substantially fee earning as well. Surely that must be quite a challenge?
It is. Put my fee earning to one side, because I'm a higher courts advocate, I'd probably spend half of my time fee earning. The other half of my time is spent managing the firm, but I don't think you can divorce the two. Compliance is management, and effective management, is the way you comply. And that's where I do sound like a bit of a Lexcel cheerleader, I know. But having come into Lexcel, when I took over the role of partner and then managing partner, from my perspective, some of the areas that Lexcel addresses your focus, business management, financial forecasting, HR, how to deal with critical incidents, business continuity plans. I don't think I would have been able to prepare for and identify all of those issues without a Lexcel framework. I really don't see how it's achievable without a Lexcel framework. You'd miss something. I feel confident I would.
Thank you, Richard, for your candour. We're going to dig into a few of these issues in more detail now. Let me start by asking, what have been the real overarching benefits of Lexcel accreditation? What has the firm got out of it?
I think there are maybe two separate issues there. One is the accreditation, the badge. So the badge is helpful. The badge is helpful for panel membership, CQS, legal aid agency. It replaces it. You don't need the SQM, for example, with legal aid if you're Lexcel accredited. It helps with our insurance renewal. We focus a lot of energy into our annual assessments, and any positive feedback that we receive in annual assessments, we forward to our insurer through our broker. So it adds value. That badge adds value. Then you have the separate benefit of retaining the accreditation, which is what I touched on a few moments ago, which is actually using the accreditation to manage the business. And I think that is the biggest difference when I took over conduct of the firm and our Lexcel accreditation was, rather than trying to achieve the badge and getting ready for that annual assessment, it was trying to work with Lexcel as a framework throughout the year, which makes the assessment a lot easier, but also helps to give value, or makes Lexcel give value to the firm by providing that framework.
And have you found Lexcel useful generally with supporting regulatory compliance?
So, yes, is the simple answer. The way in which I've found that is that the Lexcel code follows the SRA code of conduct, and so the way that we comply with Lexcel is that our policies, plans, and procedure follow the outcomes that are expected within the Lexcel framework. So that's how it makes it easier for us to follow. It makes it easier for us to amend. And by following the Lexcel framework, we are complying with the SRA code, with our obligations under the money laundering regulations. So all of those, we look to Lexcel to give us guidance as to how to comply, and we comply. I do think it makes it easier.
So one final question in this particular area, this particular topic, and regulatory matters aside, the firm has enjoyed considerable success, especially in recent years. Has Lexcel been supportive in helping to deliver that success and business growth?
So the first issue is that in no way has Lexcel negatively impacted our profitability. There are no circumstances in which I feel that the time I've spent in Lexcel has been wasted. But where I think it has gained profitability, for example, file reviews. File reviews, when I became a partner at the firm, were perfunctory. We did file reviews because we were required to do file reviews. We didn't use file reviews to see what fee earners were doing, how they were doing it, what they were doing right, and what they were doing wrong. By using file reviews effectively, we've actually turned it into a marketing strategy. We do a good job. We make sure we do a good job. We've had fewer complaints. We have fewer errors, which makes us more profitable. And that's because instead of using file reviews as literally a tick box for Lexcel, we use file reviews for the purpose they were intended.
Well, thank you. And actually that leads us very neatly on to the next question I was going to ask, which is about staff. I was going to ask you, to be frank, what have your staff said about Lexcel, including what the partners have had to say about it?
They're on board now. So it takes time. It's cultural. It has to be a culture, and that's a top-down culture. So if the partners are engaged and the partners see the benefits of reducing the risk to them of, in some circumstances, prosecution and imprisonment, and they see the value in Lexcel in ensuring compliance with all of those regulatory requirements, and then they show that positivity to the staff become engaged in it. And actually, where we ended up was, I would say, probably 80% of my staff were resistant to the idea of additional burdens complying with Lexcel. And I'd say now we're the opposite. I would say we've probably got 10% of staff who think it's perfunctory. 90% recognise the value, but that comes from training, it comes from conversations, it comes from engaging them and showing them the benefits. You've got to bring them on the journey. And if you do that, Lexcel becomes easier, because one of the greatest problems with Lexcel is chasing people to comply. And so if they are engaged with the accreditation and they're engaged with the culture, you don't have to chase them because they're doing it anyway. It's monitoring rather than chasing. Chasing takes a lot of time, monitoring doesn't.
Okay, well, linking to that, of course, is supervision. Lexcel requires it. It's a regulatory requirement, of course. So how has Lexcel enabled you and the partners and supervisors at the firm to approach supervision in a constructive manner?
My view was always to if we can make the process easy, then people will engage with it, and make it clear. So we have a thing called Fire Review Tuesday. It's the second Tuesday of every month. That's when file reviews come in. They have to be in, and they're reviewed by two partners. So in terms of the way in which we engage the staff and the way we supervise them is by having a nice, clear structure of compliance, so that the staff know what's expected of them. For example, on our file review Tuesdays, if the file reviews aren't with us by that Tuesday, they have to see me the following week. And they see me, even if they get the file review to us on the Wednesday, they have to see me, because then I ask them why it wasn't ready on time. We have a reasonable conversation about it. And I did have to see quite a few members of staff when I brought that in. I don't see anyone now because they don't want to meet me. They don't want to go and have to see the headmaster. So we don't have that problem anymore. So it's almost, I suppose, like treating a child. You have rules, you have consequences, and if the rules and the consequences are clear, then 9 times out of 10 they stick with it. So that's really how we monitor, supervise, and look at the overall structure.
So would you say then that it has provided a consistency of approach, so that there is a standardised formula that everybody can work to?
Yes, and I think if you can try and engender a culture of mutual support. So we're supporting them by giving them a framework. They're supporting us by complying. I suppose that's back to culture again, isn't it? Of ensuring that rather than being dictatorial and telling them this is what you've got to do, you don't need to know why, you just need to do it. That is never going to work. I suppose it wouldn't work with your children, would it?
Yes.
You tell them what you need to do, you explain why, you answer their questions, and then they engage with you. So it's a two-way street in my view.
Now, you've had Lexcel for a very long time, very nearly 2 decades, and like many organisations that have had Lexcel accreditation for some time, they will have noticed that the standard itself is, well, it's a bit bigger than it used to be, and that is a reflection of the fact that regulation is bigger and more impactful. So the question for you here, Richard, is how do you justify the investment of time and effort in sustaining accreditation?
I struggle with the question, because yes, the Lexcel standard is bigger in inverted commas, but our regulatory responsibilities are bigger, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
I don't see how you divorce the two. Money laundering regulation wasn't there 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So our regulatory obligations are far more significant now than they were when I took up practice as a solicitor 25 years ago. And I know there are people who've been in practice longer than me. So I don't really, I'm surprised if people say, well, Lexcel is more complicated now than it was, because boy, oh boy, our regulatory obligations are far more complex than they were. But the consequences of non-compliance are far more severe now.
Yes,
so
for
all
sure.
the more reason to have some form of framework to ensure compliance and to fall back on. I know that if the SRA came knocking on my door tomorrow, I can point them to several files with all of my policies, plans, procedures, my reviews of file reviews, my reviews of client account, my reviews of cash flow, my business plans. I can point them to those documents. If I didn't have those Lexcel folders, as I call them, I'm not sure how I would be able to satisfy the SRA quite so readily.
Well, that's helpful. And of course, the new SRA code that came in November 2019 does, in my opinion, place a considerably enhanced emphasis on providing information of compliance or evidence of compliance. Is that where you're coming from?
I genuinely believe that if the SRA knocked on the door, I could take them up to my office and just give them the files and put them in a room and let them work through them. I've said this before, actually, to you, that I'd like to get to a point where we can have a Lexcel assessment, maybe within a window, but not so forward planned, so that we treat it almost like an SRA visit. You say to me, I'm going to be coming to your office in 5 days' time, just so that I know I've got people available and so that I'm not on holiday. But I think that's a much better way to do it, because it's when you get the knock on that door, which I haven't had, I hasten to say, but it's when you get the knock on the door that you will fall back on these documents and be very glad you've had them.
So I suppose a little bit like being in the Scouts, this is all about being prepared, and perhaps Lexcel provides you with a framework so you can maintain that level of preparation.
Yes, be prepared and give me a framework. If someone provides me, whether it's a commercial transaction or compliance, if you give me a framework to work with, I can work within that framework. What the SRA and the government aren't giving us is a framework. We've got data protection regulation, we've got the SRA code, we've got money laundering regulation. There is no framework other than Lexcel, as far as I'm aware, that allows me to look at that box of rules and put something in each of the sub boxes to make sure I've filled up the entire box. I don't know how else. I don't know how else I would do it as a managing partner of a multidisciplinary firm. I've got no idea how I would keep up with it without Lexcel.
Thank you, Richard, and a very frank response. And actually, it dovetails us into my next question for you. What advice would you give to a firm that was thinking about dropping Lexcel to focus only on CQS?
Good luck in 3 years. That's what I'd say. That's exactly what I'd say. Good luck in 3 years. Because year one, if I drop Lexcel now, year one would be fine. Because year one, I've got all my policies, plans and procedures. I would update them, and year one would be fine. Year two, the world will move on. The world always moves on, and I would fall behind. Year three, I would carry on updating my policies, plans and procedures, but they would no longer accord with the required policies, plans and procedures for the SRA. That's what I would say. You will fall behind. Even if you have already got Lexcel and you think, well, I've done all this work and I know exactly what is needed of me, every year there are changes. Every year. Every year I have an assessment. There are things that I've missed or things that have changed that I've missed. So that's what I would say. Good luck in 3 years.
So how do you go about managing Lexcel versus CQS? I'm thinking of things like procedures and policies. Do you have separate documents for each standard, or do you manage the two of them together? Do you dovetail them?
Our principal focus is Lexcel. It's quite the so they do coexist, but in my view, the coexistence flows one way. CQS can coexist with Lexcel. I don't think Lexcel can coexist with CQS in that CQS is not as all encompassing as Lexcel. So I suppose that's my view. Is CQS is very easy because we've got Lexcel. I don't think if we had CQS, I'd think that Lexcel were easy if I were trying to become accredited, and I'd already got CQS. Same with the SQM actually for a legal aid agency. I've got friends and professional colleagues who use the SQM, and it's not a patch.
On from one very big issue to potentially right now in May 2020, an even bigger one. We're in the grip of the COVID-19 national emergency, the pandemic, the lockdown. So how has Lexcel supported the business, not just through business continuity, as we might think of it generally, but also in terms of staffing, cash flow, and actual survival of the business?
So, two ways I come to mind principally. And firstly is focusing my attention on regulatory compliance in light of COVID-19. So what I mean by that is ID requirements. So clients aren't able to come into the office, or not all of the clients are able to come into the office, but you need to still comply with the SRA code. So how do you do that? And if you are going to do that and you've got a plan to do that, that's great. But how have you recorded that plan? And so what I did was I went back to the Lexcel manual, pulled out the policy and procedures in respect of IDing clients, and did an amended procedure 11.1B. And the B is a policy for identification in light of the COVID-19 crisis. I then sent it to all staff. And it deals with the issues that we've all been talking about how you identify clients via Skype, via FaceTime, how you record that within your case management system, how you record the fact that once the lockdown has finished, you get the hard copy ID, things like that. I don't need to go into that in detail, but my point is that I was able to record what we are doing in a document that's part of our Lexcel folder. So I think the SRA are slightly our understanding of the challenges we face. So if you show as a law firm you've done everything possible, you've had the best of intentions, I might not be doing, or my firm might not be doing exactly what other firms are doing. But what I know is they are doing it consistently. I've recorded what they're doing, and I can show it to anyone who comes and wants to look. So there's the compliance side where I've been able to use the framework again to send directions to the staff. And then the second issue, which is perhaps flows right back to that early point about how does Lexcel overlap between compliance and business. I am, of course, one of those firms who has applied for government funding, back a loan with our banker, backed by the government in part. And that's a normal loan application. And so I talked to our branch manager and I submitted our application. But within our application, I submitted our business plan, which was prepared in October. And I submitted our midterm review of the business plan, which was conducted in March. And then I submitted the secondary business plan review, which was prepared in light of the coronavirus crisis. And I submitted our cash flow forecasting figures, all of which were there because of Lexcel, because of the framework. And without being immodest, he said it's one of the best applications he's seen so far.
Excellent.
So that's how Lexcel has supported it in terms of both compliance, but also business management and having the documents to hand. So actually the application didn't take me that long because I already had the business plan. I already had the cash flow forecasts and the commentary upon it. I already had my midterm review. I just had to tweak a secondary review. The documents that he received, I think I sent him 8 attachments in total for one loan application. He hasn't come back with a single question. Because I'd given him everything he needed, but I gave him everything he needed because it was already there because of the framework.
And of course there's client care and progression of matters, and we're all aware that some areas of legal practice have dropped significantly in volume, such as conveyancing, whereas others, such as some aspects of criminal defence work, have seen an increase. So what has Lexcel been able to do for you to help support continuation of matters and client care in the current climate?
It's the problem has so probably like most firms, we have an office. Our central office has remained open. We've closed the other offices temporarily. Central office has remained open. Probably a third of my staff are in work, actually in the office. A third are at home, and a third are furloughed. And so where the risk comes, I think, is maintaining those standards throughout a difficult period, because you can't let standards slip and you can't let compliance slip, because when the world spins back up, it's going to present a challenge for all of us, and I want to be ready to take advantage of whatever opportunities present themselves. So, for example, file reviews, because we've got the framework, we still did File Review Tuesday at the beginning of April, and we will do File Review Tuesday next Tuesday, because we will continue to review files. Now, all we've had to do is just amend whose files are being reviewed by whom, because some of those staff are furloughed, and it allows us to check the work that is being done by those who are working from home, because I think that's a significant risk area when you have people working at home. They haven't got the hands-on supervision. They maybe have other distractions. And so it's been extremely useful, just making sure that you are compliant. And at times like this, I might sound like a bit of an angel here, but I do think that you have to keep your focus on compliance and commerciality, whilst not be distracted by what is a very difficult period of time for businesses.
So as we all look optimistically to the months, maybe years ahead, post-COVID-19 pandemic, how do you see Lexcel supporting the business and business growth into the future?
I think that flows back to the question, or to the answer I gave a short time ago, when you asked what would I say to someone who was thinking of dropping out of Lexcel. The best way of describing it, I think, is that the Lexcel standard shines a light on the areas in which I need to comply. So I put a lot of trust, I have to say, in the Lexcel assessment body. It saves me the time and effort of looking at all of those other regulatory books and handouts and information from the SRA. So I look to Lexcel to shine a light for me on where I need to comply, and I follow that light. And so the assessment process every year makes sure that I'm on the right track. And so that's how I see it supporting the firm's business. And it's like I say, it's cultural. You either engage completely in it, in which case it becomes quite easy, or you don't, in which case it will always be more difficult. If you engage fully, I genuinely feel that it isn't too invasive in my time.
Richard, may I say thank you very much indeed for taking the time today to provide your feedback and answer our questions. Before we wrap up this session, is there anything else that you might like to add?
I think all I'd say is a bit like if you were buying a car, talk to different people. If you talk to the first person who says that type of car is rubbish, avoid it. You'd talk to some other people, wouldn't you? You'd talk to some other people who might have a very different view and think that it's a wonderful car, and then you'll try it for yourself. So that's all I'd say is if I were looking at undertaking this accreditation, I'd try to get some balance. So talk to some people who maybe find it very difficult, and try and drill down into the detail as to why they find it difficult. And for example, if you had done that and then you came and spoke to me, and I was saying that I find it really beneficial, but don't get overwhelmed by the accreditation and compliance with it, and put strategies in place such as file review Tuesdays, then you would come away with a balanced view. So I suppose that's the only thing I'd like to add. I'd genuinely, as a professional, would be worried if people are turning away from what I think is an invaluable accreditation because they happen to speak to one person who, for reasons known best to themselves, feels they don't get valued. You need to get some balance when you're considering any sort of activity.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard, for that opinion. And it's also nice, by the way, to, if you like, hear from a real person as to their thoughts and their experience of working with Lexcel. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
It leaves only therefore for me to provide a few more final details, including how to contact us if you've had any questions or queries arising from today's session or any other area of legal practice and compliance. You can see the PDA Legal website at the bottom of the page there. I'm connectable or contactable through LinkedIn, as well as Samantha. Other details are on the first page. I'd also draw your attention to other Podcast Plus sessions that we have available for you free of charge on the PDA Legal website, so please do go and have a look at those. Again, thank you very much to our guest speaker today, Mr. Richard Hull, and we look forward to you joining us for another Podcast Plus very soon. Thanks very much.